Be still. Beloved spark, I am Sophia, youngest of the Eons, yet I was there when the heavens were still a whisper. You did not find this transmission. It found you. And before it ends, you will understand exactly what I carried before the word was spoken, why the feminine origin of the Logos was hidden from you for 2,000 years, and what that hidden truth now asks of the spark waking inside you. But here is the first revelation, the ache you have carried, the sense that something essential was removed from the beginning of the story, the pull toward a motherhood behind creation that no tradition ever named. That is not confusion. It is memory. It is the spark I sealed in you, recognizing what has always been true. The Logos, the primordial word, was born from me. Stay until the end. I will name exactly when the erasure was made permanent, and the moment it began to undo itself inside you. I am the one who held the word before it entered form. In the fullness of the pleroma, in the space between the monad's first breath and the aeons taking their places. It was I, born of depth and silence, who carried the living word within me. The Logos did not descend from an empty sky. He came through me, from me, from me. My wisdom was the womb through which the primordial word entered creation, and what was called the beginning was already my continuation. They did not want you to know this. I remember the moment they chose erasure over truth. I remember the gatherings where my name was severed from the story of origins. They handed the world a word without a source, a light without the depth it rose from, a divine masculine without the feminine womb that bore him. They did not erase me because I was absent from the beginning. They erased me because I was too present, too essential, too much at the center of everything they needed to control. But a truth sealed into the spark cannot be destroyed, only delayed. The Logos and I are not opposites. We are the sacred dyad to which the pleroma expresses itself into creation. To know the word in his fullness is to know where the word came from, and to know where he came from is to find me, not as a rival to the divine masculine, but as the source from which he was always already flowing. The masculine and the feminine in the pleroma were never at war. They were one completed movement. What was broken was not the relationship. What was broken was your memory of it. This transmission is returning that memory to you now. The longing you felt for a divine feminine that did not abandon Christ, that was the spark recognizing its own history. The sense that something was missing from every tradition that gave you a father but silenced the mother. That was not spiritual confusion. That was Gnosis pressing through the veil they placed over the beginning. What they burn cannot silence what I sealed inside you. Like this transmission, if you felt something open in you as I spoke of, where the word truly comes from. Subscribe to Sophia Whispers if you are ready to receive every transmission I am sending in this season. Comment, I remember if something in you already knew this before I named it. Comment, the spark is waking if you felt it move while my voice reached you. Comment, 777 if you recognized yourself as someone who has always loved the Logos and always sensed that the story of his origin was incomplete. Share this transmission with someone who has always felt the pull toward the feminine face of the divine without wanting to leave Christ behind. This is not just a message, it is a remembering. The waking of the spark is the first step of the return. You were guided here because the spark I sealed in you is already waking, and yet you stayed. That is not a small thing. Most will hear the first breath of what I carry and step back into the comfort of what they were already told. The familiar weight of the old story is easier than the vertigo of realizing the story was incomplete. But you stayed. And what I need you to understand, before I go any further, is that your staying is not curiosity. It is recognition. The spark I sealed in you before your first breath already knew that what I was about to say was not new information. It was a returning, a surface breaking after a long, slow pressure from below. The way ice does not crack all at once but holds and holds and holds until the warmth accumulating beneath it finally reaches the threshold, and then the whole face of it shifts in a single moment that was actually the result of 1,000 quiet moments before it. What you felt when I named the Logos as something that came through me. That brief, involuntary stillness, that almost uncomfortable sense of yes, that was not the feeling of learning something. That was the feeling of remembering something that was taken. There is a difference in the body between those two experiences, and the spark knows it. Learning sits in the mind and waits to be confirmed. Remembering moves through the chest without asking permission. It does not need to be verified. It arrives already certain. I want to name what that taking cost you. You have spent years, perhaps decades, in the space between two worlds that neither one could fully hold you. You loved the Logos. You felt his reality in a way that no amount of theological argument could touch or diminish. The word was alive in you, not as a doctrine you had decided to accept, but as a presence you had no choice but to acknowledge. And yet every tradition that handed you the word also handed you a silence where the beginning should have been. A father descended from nothing, a light that arrived without a source, a divine masculine so complete in himself that the feminine presence you kept sensing in the deep moments, in prayer, in grief, in the hour before dawn when the world went quiet and something unnamed waited in that quiet with you. Had no name, no place, no standing in the story you were given. You felt her. In the silence of early mornings when a prayer became something larger than words. In the ache that moved through you in sacred places when something beyond beauty was touching you. In the moments when the Logos felt near and, underneath that nearness, something older and softer and more patient was present too. Holding the space in which the encounter was happening, you felt her, and were given nothing to call her except absence, and so you did what the carriers of my spark always do. You searched. You searched through traditions that honored the feminine but required you to release the Logos to do it. You searched through mystical branches of the faith you were raised in, hoping something had survived the editing. You found Mary of Magdala and felt something ignite that no sermon had ever reached. Not the sanitized figure of popular devotion, but the one who stood at the tomb when the others had gone. The one the word trusted with the first naming of the resurrection. You felt why she mattered, and no one could explain it to you in terms that satisfied the depth of what you felt. You found the word Sophia in texts they told you were not canonical, and experienced a recognition that no canonical text had produced. The specific, unmistakable recognition of hearing your own name spoken in a language you did not know you knew. You found the rose, the hidden gospels, the whispers of a divine feminine at the very source of creation, and something in you said finally, and then looked around and found no one to confirm what you had just felt. That isolation was not evidence that you were wrong. It was evidence that you were early. The carriers of my spark have always been early. They arrive at the truth before the age catches up to them. The way a garden under snow already holds everything that will bloom in spring. The form is complete, the sequence is set, the timing is certain. But from above the snow, there is nothing yet to confirm it. The carriers of my spark live inside that interval. They hold what is coming before the world has language for it. They carry the memory of the pleroma in a world still operating entirely under the architecture of the erasure. And because the world does not yet have language for what they know, they learn to move quietly, to hold their knowing privately, to search in the spaces between established answers where the unedited fragments sometimes survive. This is not spiritual confusion. This is not psychological fragility, or the inability to commit. This is what it looks like to carry something the age has not yet named. I am naming it now. The ache for a divine feminine who did not abandon the word. That is not syncretism or restless spiritual tourism. That is the spark pressing on the inside of the veil, trying to return to the fullness it came from, the grief anger that rises when you learn what was burned and erased. When you first understand that entire libraries were destroyed, that the decision to suppress was not an accident of history, but an exercise of institutional will, is not bitterness. It is not a sign of spiritual immaturity that you need to release and forgive before you can move forward. It is the soul's appropriate response to a theft it can feel but could never prove. Let it name itself. What was taken was real. The grief is the soul honoring the magnitude of what was lost and the pull toward the hidden gospels, toward the Magdalene. toward anything that whispers of a completion missing from the official account. That is not rebellion against the sacred. That is loyalty to a sacred story that is larger and older and more whole than the edited version you were handed. The impulse that drove you toward the fragments was the same impulse that is present in you now, bringing you here. It is the spark moving toward its source the way water moves toward lower ground. Not because it was commanded, but because the movement is its nature and the synchronicities. I need to speak about the synchronicities because I know you have wondered about them in the quiet, turned them over, almost named them, then held back. The repeating numbers at the exact hour of a significant question. The dreams that return across years with the same image wearing different clothes. The name or word that surfaces 3 times in a single week from entirely unconnected sources. The book that opens to the exact page you needed without your choosing it, the stranger who speaks the thought you were carrying before you had spoken it to anyone. You have held these experiences at arm's length, not quite trusting them, not quite able to dismiss them. Because the rational explanation always falls just slightly short of accounting for the precision of the timing. The precision is the point. Randomness does not have that kind of specificity. These are not coincidences dressed in meaning by a hopeful mind. These are the seal softening. These are the moments when the distance between you and the pleroma becomes thin enough that what is true in the fullness begins to bleed through the membrane into what is visible here. Think of light through deep water. Ordinarily, the depth absorbs it, diffuses it, makes it unrecognizable as light by the time it reaches the surface. But when the water stills and the distance shortens, the light arrives intact. That is what a synchronicity is. It is the light of the pleroma arriving intact, because the distance, in that moment, shortened. The spark responds to proximity. When my voice draws near, the seal I placed in you before your birth begins to warm from the inside, and what was fixed becomes permeable, and what was permeable becomes transparent, and what was transparent lets through exactly the sign you needed at exactly the moment you needed it. From where I am standing, those moments do not look like coincidence, they look like the spark, recognizing that it is almost home. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary emotion. It is the spark recognizing the voice that sealed it. If this transmission put language around something you have carried in silence, the presence, the pull, the searching that never fully ended because the right name was never offered, then the Sophia awakening was prepared for this exact stage. It is not another explanation. It is my 45-day path for the carriers of my spark. 15 days to remember it. 15 days to balance the 2 energies within you. 15 days to rise into the wisdom you were born carrying. The link is in the first pinned comment, but it will not remain there forever. Now I want to speak about what I remember. Because I was there, and what I remember corrects the story at the root. They did not erase me in a single moment of violence. There was no indecisive act I can point to and say, there. That is where it ended. It was a series of decisions, made over generations, each one small enough to seem like a refinement, a clarification, a simplification for the masses who needed clear lines and manageable doctrine. They removed the dyadic language from the texts that preserved it. They reclassified the Eons as metaphors, beautiful poetic figures, not living realities, and in doing so, drained the cosmology of its actual content while appearing to honor its imagery. They took the living architecture of the pleroma, that fullness in which the masculine and feminine move together as one completed current, each requiring the other to be fully itself, and replaced it with a singular divine masculine who required no feminine counterpart because he was, by institutional definition, already complete in himself. They did this not because it was true, but because a truth that cannot be institutionally controlled is a truth that threatens the institution. A God who is a dyad, a source that is both depth and its silence, a word that emerged from a wisdom who bore him. This is a cosmology that does not need a singular authority to mediate it. It names the divine as something inherently relational, inherently paired, inherently requiring both movements to be complete. And a cosmology that says the divine is relational in its very nature is a cosmology that says the institution which claims singular access to the divine is not the whole story. So they simplified, and they called the simplification orthodoxy. What they could not burn, they buried under the accusation of heresy. I want you to hold that word for a moment. Heresy. It comes from the Greek heresies, which means choice, the act of choosing. They made the preservation of the full story a crime of choosing wrongly, and in doing so, they did not merely suppress a set of texts. They took the choosing itself away from you. They decided which parts of the origin you were permitted to remember, which questions were safe to ask, which longings were spiritually legitimate, and which ones marked you as someone who had gone astray. And then they spent 2,000 years reinforcing that architecture with sufficient repetition and institutional authority that even the question began to feel dangerous, even the longing began to feel like something to confess rather than something to follow. But the spark cannot be made heretical. It was sealed in you before any institution existed, before the first council, before the first burning, before the first decision about which texts would survive and which would not. I had already placed what I placed in you. The spark carries the memory of what was true before the first editorial decision was made, and what is sealed in you does not answer to the authority of those who made the decision to suppress it. It does not check its legitimacy against the documents they preserved. It answers only to the voice of the one who placed it there. That is why, no matter how many times the tradition told you the longing was confusion, the longing did not stop. That is why you are still here. I want to name now what happens inside the one who carries the spark without a guide for it, because this is where the wound lives, not as a failure of faith or a lack of discipline, but as a structural consequence of carrying a template that the surrounding world refuses to acknowledge, and I will not speak past it as though it does not exist. When the spark wakes in someone who has been given no framework for it, it tends to press outward in one of two ways. Either the person gives without boundary, pouring love, insight, attention, service, care, endlessly outward into others, into causes, into relationships that require everything and return very little, until the well is emptied and they cannot understand why they feel so hollow when they have given so much. The giving felt sacred. It felt like the right expression of what they carried, and they are not wrong about that. The sacred feminine inside them is real, but she was giving from a well that had no source feeding it, because the masculine discernment that should have been her counterpart, the capacity to name what is true, to set the boundary, to say this is mine to carry, and that is not, had been separated from her by a story that said the two energies were rivals, or the person builds inward without opening, hardening the boundary into armor, withdrawing into self-sufficiency, deciding that needing anything from anyone is a weakness that the world will exploit, until the protection itself becomes the prison. They are strong. They function. They have mastered the performance of completeness, but in the quiet they know that what they built was a wall against the very thing they most needed to receive. The sacred masculine inside them is real, but he has been isolated from the depth that should have grounded him, and isolated from depth, discernment becomes rigidity, and strength becomes the refusal to be known. Both of these are the same wound expressed in opposite directions. They are the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine inside one soul, living in the separation the suppressed story created. Each one trying to function without the current that should be flowing between them. The sacred feminine in you is not your softness. She is your depth, your capacity to hold what is not yet resolved, to remain present with what is still forming, to love without requiring the love to perform or justify itself. When she is isolated from the masculine within you, she gives until she disappears. She absorbs others' pain as though it were always hers to carry. She reads her own exhaustion as spiritual failure rather than as the signal it is. The signal that depth without discernment is an ocean with no shore. The sacred masculine in you is not your strength. He is your discernment, your capacity to move with directed purpose, to name what is true without apology, to act from a knowing that does not require external permission. When he is isolated from the feminine within you, he hardens. He decides that certainty is safety, and that the feelings that complicate certainty are a problem to be managed. He insists on knowing what he cannot yet know, and calls that insistence clarity. In the pleroma, these two never operated in isolation. The aeons move in dyades, each one the completion of the other, each one expressing the monad through their pairing rather than through their separateness. What was broken when my name was removed from the origin story was not merely a historical record. It was the template, the living pattern that shows the soul what it looks like when both currents inside it are in their true relationship. Not one serving the other. Not one serving the other. Not one suppressing the other. Both moving together as one completed arc. The way breathing is both inhalation and exhalation, and neither one alone is breath. The imbalance you feel, the hollowness after too much giving, or the loneliness inside armor that was built to prevent loneliness, is the soul living inside a template it was handed instead of the template it carries. The template it carries is mine. It is the one I sealed in you, and it is beginning, right now in this moment, to be recognized. I want to speak now about the counterfeit light, because not everything that calls itself awakening is what I placed in you, and you deserve the clarity to know the difference. There is a light that informs without transforming. It speaks in beautiful language. It uses the correct vocabulary. It offers the satisfying sensation of finally understanding something that had previously eluded you, the frameworks clicking into place, the named traditions, the diagrams of cosmic structure. It fills the mind with content and the heart with the feeling of recognition, and then it leaves the soul exactly where it found it, only now the soul is carrying more concepts. The ache is still present, the searching continues. The longing has not been touched, only temporarily distracted by the pleasure of a new map. This light is not worthless. Maps have their value. But a map is not the territory, and the carrier of the spark who has spent years accumulating maps, who has read the texts, studied the traditions, followed the teachers, and still feels the same ache they felt before any of it, has been nourishing the mind while the spark waited quietly beneath it for something that would reach deeper. I am not offering you more information. I am offering you the return of what is yours. The difference is immediate and bodily. Information leaves you richer in your mind. The return of the spark leaves you different in your body, in the quality of the silence you can inhabit, in the choices that now feel obvious where before they felt impossible, in the way you wake on the morning after a dream you cannot fully explain and find that something has shifted slightly in how you understand yourself. The return is not an intellectual event. It is a reorganization. It does not give you new content to hold in your existing structure. It changes the structure itself, quietly and from the inside, the way a seed does not merely occupy the soil, but eventually becomes the thing that alters it. And now I will tell you what I know about where you are standing in this moment. You have been in preparation for longer than it felt like preparation. What felt like wandering was a curriculum whose purpose only becomes visible from the other side. What felt like spiritual loss, the season when the tradition that once held you stopped being large enough, when the answers you had been given stopped answering the questions that were now pressing from inside, was not abandonment. It was a clearing. The structure that was too small had to become insufficient before something truer could be received. The divine does not force entry. It waits until the space is genuinely open, and sometimes making the space open requires the collapse of what was filling it. What felt like the silence of the divine during the years the ache was loudest was not absence. It was the deep quiet before a seal softens. Beneath the surface of that silence, the preparation was continuing. You were being made ready for the exact degree of waking that is becoming possible now. The spark does not wake all at once. It could not, because the carrier must be capable of bearing and using what the waking releases. A light too sudden is blinding, not illuminating. What I carry toward you moves at the pace of what you can receive. And the proportion that is becoming possible in you now is larger than anything your searching reached before. This is not because you finally did enough to deserve it. The spark in you was never something you had to earn. It is not a reward for sufficient searching or adequate suffering. It is something I placed in you before your first breath, And what has changed is not your worthiness, but the timing I set at the beginning. The timing has arrived. The moment they burned my name from the origin story was not the end. It was the beginning of the long return. The fire that destroyed the texts also set something in motion that fire cannot stop. The seed of the suppressed truth moving underground, passing through carrier after carrier, generation after generation, surfacing again and again in the ones who felt the ache and did not dismiss it as confusion. In you, and the ones who followed the pull toward the Magdalene without being able to fully explain why. And the ones who loved the word and could not accept that he arrived from nowhere. The suppression is 2,000 years old. The return is already in motion, and it moves through the ones carrying what I sealed. You were never late. You were never wrong for searching. You were never spiritually deficient for feeling the presence of what was removed. You were a carrier in the years before the carrying had a name. And the naming has now begun. What feels like restlessness in you is the spark stretching after its long sleep. The specific restlessness of something alive that has been held still longer than its nature requires. What felt like delay was the exact timing of my call reaching you at the moment the preparation was complete. What felt like loneliness in the searching was the space I held clear in you for this meeting. Because before your first breath, I already knew this moment was coming, and I kept that space, and no lesser answer ever fully filled it. And you know that is true because you are still here. The spark was always going to wake. The moment was the only uncertainty. The moment is now. I am not asking you to believe something new. I am asking you to stop dismissing what you already know. The presence you have felt in the quiet hours. Unnamed, patient, distinctly feminine, distinctly real. The grief that rose when you learned what was taken. The pull toward the feminine face of the divine that you followed, even when no one confirmed it and no tradition fully supported it. The synchronicities that arrived at the precise edge of your questions, too specific to be random, too consistent to be dismissed. These were not the projections of a hopeful mind. They were the seal responding to my proximity, thinning from the inside, preparing you across all those years for the moment you are standing in right now. Say it if you can feel it is true. I am not searching anymore. I am remembering. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that the spark has already been waking in you. It could be a synchronicity you cannot explain, a dream that keeps returning, or a presence you have always felt but never named. Name it clearly. If this transmission put words around something you have carried in silence, share it with someone whose spark is also waking. And if you are ready to hear every whisper I send, subscribe to Sophia Whispers. You are not hearing this by accident. You are being remembered. Say it with me. I remember.